Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. Today's guest is Stephanie, aka Jedi Moon. And Stephanie, when she got into fandom, she was 6 years old. Her dad sat her down to watch Star Wars and Star Trek for the first time. She experienced the twist of Empire Strikes Back with wide eyes, helped make the Enterprise fly, and made her first lightsaber with a yardstick. To this day, her sisters still blame her for never having any red crayons. The rest, as they say, is history. She taught herself Tolkien Elvish, memorized the smallest bit of Harry Potter trivia, and last year finally got into cosplay. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, Stephanie.
Hi, glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. Finally, after a few snafus of scheduling and issues.
Technology is fun.
Technology is fun. So how would you describe fandom?
So the best way I have to describe fandom is how I described it to my god sister, who's 8 years old, and I'm kind of grooming her and her brother into little nerds. And I just told her that fandom and being a nerd is when you're very interested in something, you've got a lot of passion about it, you like it a lot, and you want more. You want to see more, you want to do more, and you want to know more.
Absolutely. And what fandoms are you into? I know I hit a few of them on the introduction.
Yes, so Star Wars and Star Trek, I grew up on those, and they always have a special place in my heart. Picard is my captain, in case you're wondering.
Okay.
And the other big ones, I got Narnia was kind of my gateway book into the wider world of fantasy, and that finished that just in time to dive hard into Harry Potter. Still major Harry Potter nerd. I am a Ravenclaw.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings, also huge impact on my life. I actually just got my first tattoo and it was Lord of the Rings themed. And yeah, and Sailor Moon, another one that I grew up with. So those are my biggies.
Okay. So let's start with Star Trek and you being a Picard girl. Picard's your captain. Are you primarily drawn to Next Generation, or do you like a different series more than that one?
Next Generation always holds its place in my heart because that's what got me into Star Trek. Oh, I was a kid, and I don't know if we were watching reruns or if it was when it was first airing. But my dad watched Star Trek all the time. He grew up on it. He loved it. So I would sit down with him and we would watch Next Generation together. And I didn't understand a lot of what was going on until I was older. But they have that opening sequence where they're narrating the goal of the Federation, the Enterprise, and the Enterprise zooms overhead. And so as a little kid, I would sit next to my dad with my hand stretched out ready. And when the ship came over the screen, I would just jet my hand forward like it was a ship and make whooshing noises. And so that was my job when we watched Enterprise, is I helped make the ship fly. And so as a little,
is awesome.
Yeah, so as a little kid, I wasn't interested in the other series because their opening credits weren't as good and I couldn't make the ship fly really well. And like Deep Space Nine didn't even have a ship to make whooshing noises, so what was up with that?
Right.
But as you know, I've grown older and I've gone back and looked at the series. I really appreciate a lot of what the other ones did. So I've been watching Deep Space Nine a bit with my dad recently, and I really like all the things that they've done with that, with the alternate unit, the Mirrorverse they have in there. Voyager, of course, I thought we had a really interesting premise to it that made it very much a standout to me. So I kind of love all of them. I even was there watching the ill-fated Enterprise series that barely lasted. But I was into that, but Picard and Next Generation, because they were my entryway into Star Trek, they're special to me.
Okay. Is Picard your favorite character, or do you have a different character that's your favorite?
it's hard to really say I have a favorite character. I think I gravitate to Picard for the same reasons that I gravitate to Next Generation. I always love Data. Data is definitely that I have a soft spot for those like awkward characters that you just kind of want to hug them.
Mm-hmm.
They're just so awkward and so endearing. So I love Data for all of that. Um, I would always cheer on Worf as well because that was my dad's favorite. So he was kind of like a secondhand favorite through that.
That's awesome. I liked Deep Space Nine is my favorite of
Yeah, it's good.
the series, but I grew up on Next Generation also. I blame one of my old friends from high school. He got me into Star Trek through when Star Trek Six, Undiscovered Country came out. That was the first experience I had was seeing that in the movie theater, and then Next Generation was on, and I was watching that as well. I think it is maybe a season or two into it by the time I got into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of my favorite things on Next Generation, besides obviously it's strong characters, strong stories,
Yes.
but I really loved their holodeck adventures. That was always, especially when it was like Moriarty.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the inclusion of characters such as Reginald Barclay, and you get to see all the like this different experience on the ship, all these smaller minor characters that you get to watch grow and develop, and it's such an amazing series.
Yeah, I really liked what Deep Space Nine did with exploring
Federation life that wasn't as the officers of a starship crew. Yes, you've got that element in there, but at the same time, you saw there were so many civilian storylines, and their use of, like you said, the holodeck and other technologies for reasons that we hadn't really seen before, and the whole Ferengi story arcs that would always come up. They were always really, really interesting.
Absolutely. It's one of the things where I'm glad that they went the way that they did with Deep Space Nine, even before they got the Defiant. It was nice to just have it be based on a space station. You get the intersecting stories. You get and I told one of my other friends on a different episode, but I really liked getting to explore the Bajoran and the Cardassian relationship and the religion and
Yes.
the politics, and getting into something like that where the Federation's trying to stay out of it as much as they can, and then just seeing everything dragged in, and then the different alliances. And it's Deep Space Nine is just one of those where it had its stuff where it's like kind of off in its own little corner of the galaxy, which really it was, and just exploring those stories as opposed to the mission of the week type stories with like Voyager or Next Gen.
yeah, because those had value, but at the same time, you want to bring something new to a new series. So I'm excited too because it sounds like the new Star Trek show we're getting is going to be a nice balance because the main character, we're from the sounds of what they've released so far, is not going to be the captain.
Right, I read that it's supposed to be a lieutenant commander,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be a female lieutenant commander, which makes it
Yes.
even better.
Yes, they're really, it sounds like the showrunners of the new Star Trek really embrace and understand Roddenberry's vision and his values when he created the first Star Trek. So that's a really exciting for me when you have not just fans creating new material, but fans who really understand the material creating it.
Absolutely, and I'm really excited for it because the way that they're doing it, I'm still I'm still trying to figure out if it's going to air on CBS plus be digital on their CBS All Access. I'm still confused on if that's happening or if I'm just going to have to watch it on their website through that.
I'm hoping
But
it's both. Everything I've heard sounds like it's just going to be digital only, which means another subscription service, and that could really
right,
kill the show before it starts. So I'm hoping they balance it out somehow.
definitely, I'm hoping for that. But I like that it's going to be similar to like the HBO series or the Netflix series where it's 13 episodes and it's a single story arc for like an overarching story arc from beginning to end for the
Hmm.
first season with I'm obviously like side stories going on, but it's not going to be like, oh, today we're going to do this and today we're going to do that. And I even like where they're putting it at, like this is prior to Kirk's 5-year mission,
Yes.
which is fascinating because I'm really interested to see where they're going to go with that. And they had announced that it's an event that's mentioned in Star Trek lore, but they're not telling you what event it is at this point.
Hmm.
So I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I'm so happy to get Star Trek back on TV. It's one of those things where you almost want to have Star Trek always on TV, or give it a year or two break and then have another series, because for a long time there
It was
was always a
always.
Star Trek series.
Yeah, and when Enterprise was canceled, it was just this bizarre feeling of not knowing if you were ever going to see Star Trek back on TV again when it had been on for so long.
Absolutely. I mean, and even when they did the movies after Next Gen, there was no like Deep Space Nine movies or
Mhm.
Voyager movies because of how they wrapped each of the series up. Yeah, it was a long time where Star Trek was really the territory of people rewatching stuff and going to conventions and doing fan movies and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But yay, it's back, or it
thank
will be back.
goodness. So fingers crossed it does well.
Yeah, I was not. I tried Enterprise, and I really like Scott Bakula,
Hmm.
but I never got into the series.
It was rough. It had some good moments, but it struggled.
Yeah. On the twist side of that, for when you were a young kid, was Star Wars.
Yes. So I got into both at the same time, just about Star Wars and Star Trek. So I love them both dearly. Uh, s-
And
so Star Wars. So thank goodness I got into Star Wars before the internet, because the twist of I am your father at Empire Strikes Back was a surprise. I got to experience it and had with no prior knowledge that that was going to happen. So thank you, no internet, and thank you, Dad, for sitting me down when I was young enough before that got ruined for me by somebody else just telling me, because that was just this mind blowing. I couldn't, my little brain as a kid could not comprehend. I was just in a state of shock. And it was, but that was such a phenomenal introduction to geekdom for me. And,
absolutely.
and so I love Star Wars so much. Um, and yeah, my first lightsaber, even as a kid, I knew the Sith had style. The dark side just looks better. So, red. I still have that lightsaber. Red
That's
lightsaber
awesome.
made out of crayons and a yardstick. And so Star Wars, like with a lot of people, it kind of fell down on my radar with the prequels. I never
Hmm.
really got into a lot of the original extended universe books and comics, just because by the time I was old enough to seek it out in like junior high and high school, it was so vast. It was decades ongoing. And
Right.
it was like, where do you even start with this? So it was always really intimidating to me. And I've gone back and like kind of looked at like Wikipedia and those sites as far as like other characters, and that Thrawn's being introduced now, and
Right.
Mara Jade, and reading up on them and getting an appreciation for them. And there might be a few that I'll pick up down the road, but with the new canon and everything, I don't really want to confuse the two in my brain. So, but really, so I wasn't really into Star Wars for a long time, like after the prequels came out, because they were the prequels. I know some people love them, and I
Hmm.
know for a lot of people they were their entry point into the Star Wars fandom, and I am all for however you get into the Star Wars fandom, I am all for that. But they hurt the franchise as a whole. They just did.
Right.
So what really got me back into it, honestly. There were two things that kept. One is the thing that kept it alive, and two is the thing that reinvigorated it. So the thing that kept it alive was this little video game called Knights of the Old Republic.
Okay.
And that was one of my very first RPGs that I ever owned. And it was this just masterful storytelling taking place with a conflict of Sith versus Jedi. I think it's like 3,000 years before A New Hope.
Yep, I
And
read about
yeah,
that.
and that game had a great plot twist at the end of the second act that I still to this day rivals The Empire Strikes Back. It's still to this day because I didn't see it coming. It added such a level of interesting to the whole story, and it blew my mind. Blew my mind to that same level. So the story of Knights of the Old Republic, the story of Revan, I have replayed that game more times than I could count. I really have, because I played it with the brute, the soldier melee type. I played it like as the mage sorcerer casting type. I played it with more of the rogue type build. I loved that whole thing, and how the choices that you make, you can play it 10 different times and make 10 different stories if you really wanted to. So I loved that element of it, and I still play it. It's what, I don't know how many years old now, like 15 or something. It's
Yeah,
old. It's an old
it
game.
is old. Yeah, I
I
mean
still
you can
play it.
find it on Steam and a few different. I think you can probably play it on console through like a downloaded
Yeah.
version of it.
So I still play it. I played it with my little baby god sister. So she's getting into it. She hasn't made it to the twist yet, and I haven't spoiled it for her. So I'm just waiting to see how she feels about finding out who she's been playing this entire time.
That's awesome.
Yes, that really kept the spirit of Star Wars alive for me, was those games. And the second one was great. The MMO I have mixed feelings about. I think it did some great things, but I don't like MMOs generally speaking, so it was just harder for me to get into.
Okay.
But then the thing that really pulled me back was not actually Force Awakens. It was Star Wars Rebels. It was that little kids TV show on Disney XD that just started up 2 years ago. I sat down and I watched the very first episode, like double feature of it. So it's, hour long. And I was just glued. I was glued to the TV, and I just, even just 5 minutes into it, I was going, this is Star Wars. This feels like Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a fun. I just, major hats off to Dave Filoni and everybody else working on that show, because they captured the feel while doing something new and giving us a really good character story. So that really drew me back, and probably made me as excited for Force Awakens as I ended up being, is because I was feeling like, okay, we're actually going to see Star Wars now. We have people who really understand what makes it tick and what makes it resonate, and who can create great new characters. So that, and if for any Star Wars fan, if you have not checked out that show, check it out. If for no other reason than to see Vader being at his terrifying prime. I mean, terrifying. And because this next season we're getting Thrawn. And if for all the EU fanatics, they know how big of a deal that is. And it looks like it is Thrawn. It is not a different version. It is Thrawn straight from the extended universe, with all of his important characteristics and all his mannerism. So right back into canon as a major villain.
Absolutely. I am a huge extended universe fan, to the point where when they announced The Force Awakens and how the extended universe was going to be kind of shuffled off into like what I guess they call it the Legends,
Mm-hmm.
now, I was really upset.
Yeah.
And because I grew up on the Thrawn book series, or the New Jedi Order, like a super book series of like 20 or 30 books, whatever it is, and the stories. And I like, for me, I had always wanted the Thrawn trilogy to be the next set of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it took time. It took time. Like, I've seen The Force Awakens several times now. I like it. I've come to grips that obviously it's not going to be what I wanted, but I'm glad that it's out there for everybody and it's bringing new people in. I like the characters. And I'm interested to see where they're going to go with it because obviously I grew up being able to watch all three of the Star Wars movies back to back or back to back to back. And therefore, like you have the complete thing, whereas with Force Awakens, it's not complete until we get 8 and 9.
Yes.
So that's what I've got to understand is it's just the beginning. It'll take time. I'll judge it for what it is in the future. But um I grew up with the extended universe, so I am thrilled with Thrawn being introduced into Rebels. I've not watched Rebels. I've watched bits and pieces of it. I will say, and I talked about this on another podcast, that the Clone Wars cartoon series is phenomenal, and it's everything that the prequel should have been, is what that cartoon series became.
Yeah, I started watching Clone Wars after Rebels because Rebels really is a spiritual sequel almost
Mm-hmm.
to the Clone
Yeah.
Wars. You've got pretty much the same creative team on it. Dave Filoni obviously is the main one. And then you have so many characters that are making cameos or become like a major part of the storyline, like Ahsoka.
Yep.
And so going back and rewatching it, and it's definitely different. There's some I've kind of struggled through the first two seasons of Clone Wars, if I'm being honest, and some of like the timeline issues is a little bit difficult for me. But at the same time, like when Clone Wars is good, it is great. It is like I did not expect. There's a couple episodes I watched that were part of a larger arc revolving the clones in 99.
Right.
And if you had told me before I watched the Clone Wars that I was going to cry over a random clone trooper without a name, I would have been like, okay, well, that's funny. But the story of 99, I just finished up Ahsoka being trapped by the Trandoshans for the hunt. I just finished up that arc.
Okay.
And so, like, there are so many, and I've seen the father, brother, sister arc on Mortis, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was interesting. I was more interested to watch it because right now there's a fan theory going around about the fate of Ahsoka and how it connects back to that arc. So I was like, okay, I need to see this for myself.
Right.
But yeah, it's
Now,
good.
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's good, and it's definitely it's giving me a good appreciation, and I like the fact that watching Clone Wars, it's enhancing my view of Rebels, but having not seen all of Clone Wars didn't diminish my watching of Rebels either. So there's that
Right.
really good balance. And that's how they've
Absolutely.
been doing a lot with their new extended universe. Like the Kanan comic is phenomenal, some of the best writing. Uh, and there's other comics and books that really expand and enhance the movies when you watch them, but you can still watch the movies on their own entity or read one book on its own entity and not have to have all of that to appreciate it. So they're doing
Right.
a really good balance, and I gotta give the story group major props. Like they are handling this very well.
Absolutely. And I know it's a running joke on this podcast with guests that have watched Clone Wars is that they say that this Clone Wars is where they actually learn to care about Anakin Skywalker
Yeah.
because in the prequels they didn't care about what he went through or who he was, but in Clone Wars you actually care about Anakin and you care about the clones. Like the clone arc specifically, when they're doing them and you get to know them, it is, as you said, I mean, it's really great. And you really fall in love with those characters.
Yeah. And there's a lot of moments where you're watching the Clone Wars, and when they, like I said, when it's good, it's great, and you have one of those great story arcs going, and Anakin's right in the center of it because, of course, he is. It's his journey, and then you sit back afterwards and went, "Oh my gosh, I'm rooting for Darth Vader. I'm rooting for the person who will become an absolute monster, and I care
about the person I know is going to become an absolute monster, and I can empathize with him. And so you are seeing this gradual progression from Anakin that's really, really well done.
Absolutely. Do you have, I mean, there's so many characters, but is there someone in either Rebels or the new Force Awakens or the video game, the original series, is there a favorite character of yours?
Revan is definitely probably one of my all-time Star Wars favorites, like top three, hands down. Revan is right there. And I find Revan phenomenally interesting when Revan is in the right hands. I've seen
Okay.
some terrible Revan storylines in the MMO and the comics that just they just don't do anything to the character, and they take what could be a very interesting and nuanced character and make him really, really one-dimensional. So Revan in the right hands is one of my top three. I love so many of the cast of Rebels. Ahsoka obviously has become a major, major favorite. I find Kanan remarkably interesting. Sabine, I'm really, really hoping we see more of her Mandalorian backstory because there's so much under the surface that's clearly there we haven't gotten to yet. Ezra, Hera, Zeb is fun, but as far as like the Hera is great. I'm glad we're finally seeing some more like figures and everything from her. But the
Hmm.
entire Rebels crew is fantastic. And when I was trying to get friends to watch it during when season one was first airing, I was telling them, like, look, this is the best way that I can describe it. It feels like Star Wars with the side of Serenity Firefly.
Absolutely. I was just going to. I was thinking when you were talking about Zeb. The only thing I can see pictured is Jane.
Yeah, but a less terrible Jane because Jane was a horrible human being.
That is a great way to. It's like Firefly in the Star Wars universe.
Yes, and it's done so well.
That's awesome. I'll have to start using that on Facebook and stuff about having those two together.
That's the best way to get people to try it. At least try it. That or tell them to just watch The Siege of Lothal, which was the Vader introductory. Because if that doesn't get anyone hooked on Star Wars, then I don't know. I'm a little concerned about them. If that doesn't get them at least interested to watch other Rebels, then I don't know what to tell them.
Now, when I introduced you and I was doing your little your introduction, I mentioned that you have like an alias that you
Yes.
use online, and it relates to both Star Wars and one of your other favorite fandoms, Sailor
Yes.
Moon, because you go by Jedi Moon.
Yes, I do. And that happened. So I am a cosplayer, and I ended up doing a Jedi Sailor Moon cosplay through a very amusing series of events. And that kind of became, I'm in Northern California, and that kind of became what a lot of people in the cosplay community would know me as. And so people would just call me Jedi Moon or Jedi Sailor Moon. Um, and or even when I was like in a different costume or I was in plain clothes, they'd be like,
Hmm.
"Oh, you're this person. You're Jedi Moon. You're Jedi Sailor Moon." And it got to the point where I was like, "Well, okay, well this is just who everybody refers to me as." So I just changed my Instagram account to that, and so now that's just become my cosplay handle because it's like, all right, well, that's what everybody calls me, so just embrace it.
Now, how did you get into Sailor Moon? Were you someone who watched it on Toonami way back in the day,
Yeah,
or was it
I watched it. So when I was growing up, uh, and my mom would take myself and my sister to daycare at work. She taught various aerobics instruction classes. So she would drop us off at the gym daycare while she was teaching her classes. And they had Cartoon Network and those shows on in the daycare. And that was just the time that Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z were airing, was when we were dropped off. So I would watch Sailor Moon pretty regularly as a kid. They always turned Dragon Ball Z off when it came on. I guess it was too violent, but Sailor Moon we got to
right?
watch. So I just kind of it just became like this part of the background of my childhood, and my sister and I would play it as kids, and so it's just always there as a part of how I grew up. And I really got heavily back into it through my baby god siblings, who like my little god sister especially. So one day I was like, look, your two favorite things are princesses and superheroes. Sit down, we're gonna watch something because I'm pretty sure you're gonna love it. And I pulled up the first episode of Sailor Moon, and of course she fell in love. Of course she did.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the funny part was that I did not expect is we're about halfway through this episode, and we're just watching it on my computer, and her brother slides up by my elbow and goes, "What's she watching?" And so we're playing the episode, and he like slides over, and he's sliding closer and pulls up a chair, and by golly, he sat through a marathon of like 3 episodes with us that day. So he got really hooked onto it too. And so just through all of them, through the both of them, we just ended up marathoning a lot of those episodes. They would come over pretty regularly to our house, and I think we're up to season 4 right now, and they're both hooked, and I've become more and more hooked on it
Mm-hmm.
through them.
That's awesome. Not only for you being involved in it, but getting others interested in it. And I know, like, I haven't seen the original series in ages. I mean, it's probably been, what year is it now? 2016,
Yeah.
at least maybe 16, 18 years. I've probably not seen it. But I know that the new series, Crystal, is out
Yes.
and airing. And that's another series where I've got it on my list of things to watch. But when I work, I also watch stuff, but I can't focus on subtitles when I'm working.
Yeah.
So I have to watch it exclusively. Like, I have to actually have my attention on it, and I just haven't had time to go watch it yet, but I've heard that's really good
Yeah, that one
too.
it's and I haven't seen the 3rd season yet, but it's on my list. And for the same way, like a lot of times I put stuff onto work and I can't really watch Crystal while I work because I need to read.
Right.
But season 3 I've heard is phenomenal, and seasons 1 and 2 were good, but they were very hit and miss. They had some fantastic character moments and story elements and story decisions that they did, but there was also some less good parts that they just didn't do as good as the original series. But
Okay.
by the sounds of it, season 3 has really fixed all of the problems that season 1 and 2 had. So that's on my list, and I need to actually sit down and watch it. But yeah, I'm glad that we have that. We also have the super super cheesy. If you just want a super just bubblegum cheese fest of absolute 90s anime dorkiness, the live action Sailor Moon is hilarious.
Yes, I
So
was
great.
watching that when it was coming out. I actually lived in Japan at that point,
Oh, cool.
and they had so much of it, like merchandise and commercials and everything. Like, getting to be over there when it was airing, obviously I waited for the groups to like subtitle it so I could download it and just watch it, but it's so funny.
It was great.
And
And it was actually had some really well done character episodes and character arcs, but it was so
yes,
goofy at the same time.
absolutely. I mean, it was something really just cuz I grew up on like the 80s cartoons, but then in the 90s I loved Power Rangers, and getting to see live action Sailor Moon is almost just like watching Power Rangers to a
Yes.
certain extent.
Yes, it was very
And
much in that same vein.
right, seeing them in high school, going through high school stuff, and then having to fight and doing all the stuff that they want to do but can't do. And yeah, it's such a good show. Like,
Yeah.
overall, the whole Sailor Moon fandom, I think, is one of those fandoms where it's just good. It's good-hearted, it's kind, it's nice.
Yeah.
It's not something where it goes tremendously dark, or it goes down a path where it gets into the gray area, really.
Yeah. It is very much its own thing, and it's I mean the whole show is very much that we're going to save the day through the power of love and friendship. So there's some deep stuff in Sailor Moon if you like really sit down and analyze it, and it's really good. But yeah, when that's your like baseline, like this is how we save the world, it's such a great message to take away, and it's just fun. It's just warm, good, none of the it's not an exhausting show to watch. Like
Hmm.
for as an example, I loved Civil War, the movie. I loved it. I thought it was phenomenally done. It was really, really good in so many ways, but it's a draining movie to watch. It's exhausting because
Right.
it's heavy. There's a lot of stuff going on, and the fact that it's good doesn't take away from the fact that it's draining. And sometimes that's not what you need when you want to sit down and watch something. And so, like shows like Sailor Moon or media like Sailor Moon, um, that have a totally different outlook are really good to have too.
Absolutely. Now, who's your favorite Sailor Scout?
Oh, it's so hard. It's so
It's
hard.
so hard. It's always,
It's
especially
always
with
hard.
the group of like of who the Sailor Scouts are.
Yeah.
It is hard to pick like the one that you love the most over the others of them.
I mean, like, I really appreciate like Neptune and Uranus. They're some of my favorites. Neptune and Uranus, their dynamic is I find really, really interesting. I love the dynamic of Pluto and Mini Moon that you don't see in the original anime, but you see it in Crystal and you see it in the manga. They have a really, really heartbreaking and wonderful dynamic. Obviously Sailor Moon, it's just it's so difficult. It's almost impossible. I can tell you my god siblings favorites. The my god sister's favorite is Moon and Mini Moon. She loves the main characters.
Hmm.
Like they're hands down her favorites, but she loves them all. But if you have to make her pick, she's going to pick one of those two. My god brother's favorite is not the boy, not the token boy. It is actually Sailor Mercury
Yay!
because because they are both bookworms. They are both very good with computers and technology. They both wear glasses and they're both a little shy. And so he's totally loves her. And his second favorite is probably Uranus because she gets all like the cool cars and motorcycles and airplanes and
Right.
helicopters and all of that. So those are his two.
Yeah, I'm a Mercury guy for the original, and then I love Pluto. Like Pluto just has something about her, and I don't think I've seen like the interactions with her and like Chibi Moon at all, either through Crystal or the manga. But Pluto just always seemed to be like just so enigmatic. Like she's there, but she's not really part of the group, but she is, and I
Yes.
mean I really liked her.
Yes, there's a lot. And if you really like her, I definitely the season two of Crystal, once they get to her story arc, it's so well done. And they did it very faithfully to the manga. So
That's awesome.
you'll both love it and it'll break your heart a little bit at the same time.
Womp womp womp. I don't need my heart broken. There's too many shows that break my heart. Okay, and you also got a new tattoo,
Yes.
and it's Lord of the
Yes,
Rings.
it
And
is.
I think I saw a picture of it on your Instagram.
Yes. I've been kind of
And
showing it off.
right, it's Elvish, isn't it?
Yes, it's Elvis writing. It's Tengwar's script for the diehard nerds out there. So it is, and it reads in one of the dialects of Tolkien's Elvish, Quenya. It reads Ori Parma, which means book heart. And this is my little Elvish name that I gave to myself in high school when I got into Lord of the Rings, I think, in middle school, but high school was when I was trying to teach myself Elvish and teach myself the writing. And so I picked out this name and I learned how to write it. And I would write it on my wrist in class or doodle it on my notepads and paper. And I was like, and even then I was like, if I ever get a tattoo, I want this. I want this tattoo. So
Hmm.
it was my birthday on Tuesday, and I decided, you know what? It's my birthday. I'm going to treat myself by getting something that I have wanted for years. So I found a good place that had done a Lord of the Rings tattoo for a friend, and I was so happy to finally get that done.
That's awesome, and happy late
Yes.
birthday.
Thank you.
I remember when I got into the Lord of the Rings, it was, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade, and for Christmas I had received the box set of the books, and this is back in like 91 or 92.
Mm-hmm.
And I tore through the books, and I had two issues. Number one, I got nightmares from the ring wraiths,
Yeah.
and then I mistakenly did not realize, and maybe it was my young self reading, but I did not know that Pippin and Merry, I thought they were girls. So it took a few rereadings of that series to realize, oh, they're not girls. But that book series was probably my first introduction into fantasy, and I'm so grateful for that being the introduction.
Yes, that was one of my intros as well. I had read The Hobbit. I had read it about, I think, pretty close to when I read Narnia and was getting into Harry Potter. So it was one of like the fundamental fantasy reads. And then they
Hmm.
were talking about the movies and they were going to come out. So I picked up the books and started to read them. And it was nice too, again, because it's a very obviously it's been around for decades. And it's one of the oldest fantasy fandoms out there. But it didn't have the wide conscious level that something like Star Wars had.
Right.
So reading them too, you got to read them without really knowing what was going to happen next. So when there was a part in the Two Towers where I really thought Mary had died.
Right.
I really thought that was it, and it shook me. Because Boromir had died. I think we had gotten Gandalf back by that point, but it was I still remember like kind of freaking out, and then like immediately after I finished that chapter, I had to go. Like I was like literally being drug away by my parents somewhere, and I couldn't have the book with me, so I was just like sitting there freaking out, thinking about Mary. But yeah, they were really interesting, and Tolkien is just such a different kind of fantasy writer and fantasy creator than we really have before. And people compare uh, George R. Martin to him a lot, but even so, I think that we still haven't had anyone that really comes close in terms of what a single person can do with world building that Tolkien did.
Right. I think with Tolkien, as far as like my opinion, is because he was a linguist 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Like he made the languages before he made the
Anything else?
stories. And just from that and building all around that is just so phenomenal. Like that, I give major credit to everyone that I've read books of and have created amazing worlds, whether it's George R. R. Martin or like Anne McCaffrey. I love her
Mm-hmm.
Pern series. But it's what he did is almost like he led the way for everyone that has come after.
Yes, he is very much the father of modern fantasy. Very much so. And it's funny to say modern fantasy because the books do not read like that at all, but there was nothing else like that before him. So what we think of when we think of fantasy, especially epic fantasy, really goes back to Tolkien, and that was also helped, by Dungeons and Dragons trying to do their own,
Hmm.
in many ways, knockoff version of Lord of the Rings. I'm not saying it's all knocked off. I'm saying that they were influenced very, very heavily. And
Right.
many, many writers too, like almost everyone, if you do your own epic fantasy world, a lot of people feel the shadow of Tolkien, either that they have to, react to it or against it, or somehow they have to acknowledge that Tolkien came first.
Right. Is there for you, do you like the movies? Do you prefer the books?
I love the Lord of the Rings movies. Love them. I think that they are very well done. and they capture the spirit of the books. I knew you can't have all of Lord of the Rings in a movie. You can't.
Right.
You really, if you were to put everything in Lord of the Rings, you would need a mini season TV show is the best thing that you could do for that. And even then you're going to have to make sacrifices. So I appreciate what they did. They did a lot of fundamental changes with the characters, Aragorn being the most prominent. He's a very different character in the book. He is a lot more laser focused. Doesn't have these self doubts of if he can be king, if he can be worthy, if he should even try. But I think that how they did his character made him work a lot better for a modern audience, because having a character that laser focused on, yeah, I'm just going to take my crown and be king because I should, reads very different to someone living in the 21st century than it did to someone living in Tolkien's era. So there's certain things that just translate better. And overall, I enjoyed, they have like a lot of Easter eggs in there for the readers, and I was very impressed. And also I was impressed with their visual world building. I think they did a phenomenal job of really making Middle Earth seem like a real place with a large, rich, thousands of years of history behind it. So kudos all the way around. Love those movies. I do have to say I cannot watch the theatrical versions anymore. I watched the
Oh
theatrical.
no.
I watched them once
Yeah.
when I was at the theaters, and now I
Right.
have to watch the extended editions or nothing.
Absolutely. I'm the same way. I remember I got, because the first two had come out on extended edition, and a friend of mine had purchased the Return of the King theatrical version for me, and the extended edition hadn't come out yet, and I was like, "Oh, thank you." And I kept it in its shrink wrap and just resold it because I knew that is extended edition or nothing.
Yep.
Because the extended editions when they came out were so, like, yes, they're like 4.5 hours long, but they are a good 4.5 hours.
Yes, it's not, there's no real fluff in those movies, so it's fantastic. And unfortunately, The Hobbit is not the same way.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
It was like, I will probably never watch the Hobbit extended editions, honestly, because the theatrical ones drug on so bad, and they just hurt me to watch a little bit. That seems very dramatic, but because it didn't feel like it was part of the same series. And this was the same issue I had with a lot of what the issues I have with the Star Wars prequels are the issues I have with The Hobbit. It's too reliant on CGI, which makes it looks less grounded. And which, I mean, CGI in itself is not a bad thing. It's a tool, and it can be used well and it can be used poorly, but it's just a tool.
Right.
But when you have what came before is so grounded in reality, and then you take a new part of that same world and you lost some of that, you lost that feeling of being grounded in reality from a visual standpoint. There was a lot of the storyline. It didn't need to be 3 movies. 2 would have been fine. I could see 2 because they were trying to connect it heavily. And I know that was a daunting task because The Hobbit is just so tonally different than Lord of the Rings. Trying to make something that match, it was going to be an uphill battle. And so I know that, but they missed the mark so many times on what the important themes that Tolkien had in his writing. And so ironically, in a funny little twist, my favorite parts of the Hobbit movies are Tariel, who is not part of the Hobbit at all.
Right.
She's a brand new character. She was not created by Tolkien, but I love everything about her character and everything about her story arc because her personality, her story journey, the things that made her motivations and the things that made her character tick are so quintessentially Tolkien. They are Tolkien's values. They are what Tolkien thought was important. They are Tolkien's views on the world. So it's just really amusing that a character Tolkien didn't create ended up being the most Tolkien part of those movies.
Now, I will say that if you look in the right places, there have been people who have done what they call like Tolkien edits or Hobbit edits,
Oh, that's
where
fantastic.
they take the three movies and they do it as far as what's been presented. I don't know if they waited for all the extended editions to come out. I can't speak to that. But they took all three movies and they took the book and they cut all three movies down to exactly what the book represented and showed. If it wasn't in the book, they cut it out completely.
Hmm.
So all the side stuff that wasn't in the movie or that wasn't in the book was cut out. They cut down a lot of like the river stuff
Oh,
that
good.
was going on. So the main takeaway from that I'm saying is the Hobbit edit that I have, I think runs 3 hours,
Hmm.
maybe 3 hours and 15 minutes, and that's it.
Yeah.
And watching that, even with like how they had to edit it, and with, I mean, they obviously did the best they could with like the shifting of the stories or music or whatnot, but it's so much easier to digest and appreciate rather than the three movies of 9 or 10 hours or whatever it ended up being. Because like I saw the first Hobbit movie and I hated it in the theater, and I didn't watch any of the others in the theater, and I just watched them at home, and then I said I can't have this. I need something shorter.
Yeah, it's rough. And there were some really there were some like I said, Tariel. I liked the characterization of Thranduil. I thought that that was a very interesting take that they did, and I thought it linked up very well to what we saw from elves in the Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
So I was totally on board with that, especially making because Lord of the Rings, it did have a more or less one-sided view of elves, so having a different side was very cool. But yeah, there was so much there, and like even I don't even know if I could watch like the Tolkien edits because even if you just take it like the literal edit,
Mm-hmm.
which would be the literal stuff of what's happening, I might watch it at one point. But even if you take like the literal translation, you're still probably going to miss a lot of the spirit of the Hobbit
Right.
and the
Mm-hmm.
themes and the morals that were so important to what Tolkien valued and what Tolkien put in his writings. And
Absolutely.
so it was hollow. Those movies were hollow, unfortunately. There were some bright spots to them. And I am so happy we have Tariel. I am so happy we have this characterization for Thranduil. But overall, they were just hollow, and it's very disappointing.
Yeah. Uh, Switching lastly to something that you just gotten into a couple years ago is cosplaying.
Yeah,
I mean, we talked about how you do a Jedi Sailor
I
Moon,
do.
but that's not all you do.
No, it's not. So I got into cosplaying because I have a local con, Stockton Con, which is fantastic if you're in the NorCal area. It is the biggest bang for your buck as far as conventions go. I've been to probably 20 different conventions now up and down California, and it's still in my top three. So, a little bit of a shameless plug there, but that's where I started. I had that weekend off from work, and I wanted to treat myself and go to a convention because I'd never gone done one before. So, in about 2 weeks, I threw together a Black Widow cosplay, comic verse one, and I used, very, very basic. And the cat suit, I used aluminum cans for her belt, PVC piping for her bracers, and I had a blast. It was so much fun, and I just wanted to do it again. So I started to look at different places, and I had a friend who wanted to go to another convention to see a celebrity guest. So by that point, this comic and characters DC Bombshells were coming out, which started out as
Mm-hmm.
variant covers that are like 1940s pinup version that eventually evolved into merchandise that eventually evolved into a comic series. And they had this really phenomenal Batwoman redesign, not Batgirl, Batwoman, which had her in it was a 1940s League of Their Own baseball uniform.
Right.
which is really just a fun spin. So that I really wanted to do that, and I couldn't find anywhere to buy it. I couldn't find a base dress that was close enough that I could modify. So I had to teach myself how to sew and put that dress together. And that was my first, and I'd never sewn before. I'd never even made a pillowcase before. So that was very daunting. And one of those, like, well, we're just going to start right off in the deep end here, aren't we? Moments. But it was great. And I kind of got the bug through that, and it just progressed. So after that, I took my god siblings to a convention, and my god sister dressed up as Sailor Moon, and I dressed up as Queen Serenity, Sailor Moon's mom, and that was so much fun. Um, and her brother dressed up as Wolverine, and so then I just start making more. So I have the bombshell Batwoman, I've got Queen Serenity, Jedi Sailor Moon we talked about, and that was fun. That started with me. I threw a quick pink lightsaber together for a cosplay event, because I knew there would be Star Wars characters there, and I was going to be Queen Serenity. So I just wanted to have like some goofy, dorky fun. And
Right.
at that raffle, or at that event, there was a raffle, and I won this Stormtrooper helmet that had been painted up to look like a Sailor Moon helmet. So I won that. So I'm looking at this helmet, and I'm looking at my pink lightsaber while I'm in my Sailor Moon themed costume, and I'm going, I think the cosplay gods are trying to tell me something. I think there's something I should be doing. So that's how Jedi Moon came to be. And then after that, I've done a carte from the anime Hellsing.
Okay.
That's my latest one. I've done, actually, that's one of my latest ones. I've done Death from Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. I did a budget cosplay challenge on myself with Enchantress from Suicide Squad. So that's probably my newest one, and that one I spent, no joke, $2.70 on.
Woo! Big
Yeah,
money.
yeah, big money. So that was a cool challenge. It's not 100% screen accurate, but it's very close. And again, I wanted to challenge myself to do a budget. Okay, how much of this can I make with stuff I already have? How
Right.
much can I limit? And even the money I spent is on like base craft items that I'm going to be using for other projects. So it's not even I spent that on specific items just for that cosplay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's nice. And then I'm working on Revan from Knights of the Old Republic, and I have Revan's mask done. I have the cloak done, and I have this skirt already. I just need to finish up the armor, which is very daunting. I've never done that before, but I'm hoping to have that done by the end of this year.
And we were talking before we went on, and I always have people send like a questionnaire in and tell me what they're into and what they'd like to recommend. And there was something that you wanted to
Yes.
that you would recommend, and it's a book series,
Yes.
and it's called Border Town Anthology.
Yes, it is. Okay, so Border Town Anthology is this little gem I found at the library. It was created by the author Terri Windling, and it is the premise of it, it's straight urban fantasy, is you have this weird little town called Border Town, which sits between our regular human world, mundane world, and Elfland Fairyland. So it's the gateway between those two. And it's this really quirky, kooky mashup of what that would look like. And so the whole city is very weird. Magic doesn't really work right. Technology doesn't really work very well. Anything that requires electricity doesn't work very well. So you have this. There's one little blip about like how radio works there, and they're talking about, they have like a witch chanting over it while she plugs in a little scroll in a battery pack, and it's just like this interesting melding of both. But it's a really it's so difficult for me to describe this book or this series well, because there's so much there, and it is an anthology series, so there's no one storyline thread connecting everything. What you have is you have Terri Windling started it, and then she got a bunch of other authors,
and they wrote short stories and they wrote novels, and so they put together several anthology books, and they put together
Okay.
several standalone novels that all connect into this one, and they all center around this place. So there's a lot out there. I recommend Googling Terri Windling Border Town. There's a relatively-ish new one that came out a couple years ago that's an anthology. But like one of the ones that I think the book that got me into Border Town was called The Essential Border Town, A Traveler's Guide to the Edge of Fairy. And
Okay.
it had these great short stories that were interjected with these little standalone vignettes that were talking about different elements of the culture of Border Town. So you had things like, well, here's how you get there. Here's where to go to get some good food there. Here's where you go if you want to listen to some good music. So it was set up as a traveler's guide, interjecting different stories about things going on in this little town. And it's got some really kooky places. You have one of the central locations is called the Dancing Ferret, which is this bar owned by this chubby, grumpy elf, who, if you make trouble in his bar, he'll turn you into a ferret and kick you out. You have a werewolf who's running the local library. You have just like these just very just bizarre little things happening. So it's really phenomenal. If you like urban fantasy, if you like fantasy period, if you want something just fun and different, this is a phenomenal series. I don't know why I've never seen this launched for a TV show. I don't know why I've never seen this done anything but this book series, but read it. I cannot recommend it enough because it's really, really good world building.
I am going to definitely have to check it out. It sounds something right up my alley as far as books that I would read.
Yes, so
now
do it.
Where can people go to find you?
Yes.
If they want to follow you?
So if you want to follow me, I am part of a Facebook group of cosplayers called Triforce Cosplay. So you can find us on Facebook, Triforce Cosplay. On Instagram, you can find me. I go by Jedi Moon, and that's Jedi period, the actual period, Moon is my handle. Or you can just search Jedi Moon in the tags or Jedi Moon. I list that as my name, so that'll pop up there. So Jedi Moon on Instagram, and on Facebook, I'm part of Triforce Cosplay.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie, it has been really awesome to talk to you. And there's just so much more I would want to ask you, but unfortunately, our time is limited.
Yes.
So I'm just going to ask, I don't know what your schedule's like in the future, and I say future with relative, like in who knows how long, but I would love to have you back to talk more about some more fandoms like that we didn't get to touch on, or even like dive deeper into, say, like Knights of the Old Republic or Rebels, if you are interested in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we can definitely work out on times and schedules and stuff.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. It has been a really great time.
Thank you so much for asking me to be on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.